Hey, this is Teresa Matsura, and you're listening to Uncanny Japan. Remember when I tried to gross you out back in episode 95? That time I talked about the Jinmin soul, yokai beasties that erupt on your skin, looking like human-faced growths or tumors. They start demanding to be fed. Sometimes they chat you up. Do you remember a week later after that episode when Saturday Night Live did a hilarious and curiously coincidental show about meatballs popping up on a woman's body? They had little faces too, and they talked and they sang. Yeah, that really grossed out a lot of people as well. Now, I'm not saying this is going to be a thing, but how about today we talk about toilets? Don't worry, it's not as EU as it sounds. In fact, let me introduce you to a couple of toilet gods and some of the religion, folk beliefs, and superstitions around both the latrine and the deities who reside there. Would you like to explore the stranger, more obscure corners of Japanese culture? Dig a little deeper into superstitions, curious customs, and all those mysterious creatures that inhabit the land? If so, then this is the podcast for you. Uncanny Japan is where I, author Teresa Matsura, share all the fascinating tidbits I unearth while doing research for my writing. From the bizarre to the ghastly, and everything in between. I hope you enjoy the show. Hey, let me start off by reminding you that this is episode 98, which means we're 2 shows away from the big 100. You still have time to send me any spooky, weird, or freakily heartwarming experiences you've encountered while living or visiting Japan. I'm absolutely loving everything that's been sent in so far. So much so, I think I'll be able to do a part 1 and a part 2, because the stories are all so good. I'd also like to give a little nudge to please check out our second show, the Uncanny Robot Podcast. We've got several episodes out now, and I'm excited to say that we're finally finding our feet. The shows have evolved into these wonderfully weird audio dramas with fantastic sound design, absurd yet satisfying stories, and dare I say, some pretty fancy voice acting. The new direction of the show, and the catch copy is old-time radio drama meets artificial intelligence. So a different and more energetic vibe than the episode I shared a while back. Uncanny Robot is on all your podcasting apps, YouTube, and of course the website. And may I recommend the most recent AI true crime adventure, complete with reenactments. It's called Peppers and the Screaming Youth, number 5. See if you can solve this bizarre batch of gruesome murders. Oh, and I have another mystery for you to solve. I'm ordering some more stickers, so before the next Uncanny Robot episode comes out, if you can guess what cartoon and what blockbuster Hollywood movie were tongue-in-cheekily referenced in the story, DM, message, or email me your answers. I'll do a lottery and pick 5 listeners to send both an Uncanny Japan and an Uncanny Robot sticker to. A small hint, the movie nod is a bit subtle, but once you hear it, you can't unhear it. So that's Peppers and the Screaming Youth, number 5, at Uncanny Robot Podcast. Now let's talk about toilets and what kind of divine beings hang out there. I've seen a lot of restrooms during my time here in Japan. My mother-in-law, who we all know, is very superstitious and holds fast to many old traditions, never had an ofuda or fancy paper talisman, or Kamidana, god shelf, in her bathroom, at least I can't remember. Had she, I would have asked a bunch of questions. And had she told me there was a toilet god, I would have been utterly delighted to learn more. Over the years, I did kind of learn about them, though. but I didn't really get interested until my recent trip to Kyoto. There, one of the temples sold ofuda expressly for the purpose of hanging in your powder room to honor the god who dwelled there. So I bought one. I came home, and I started doing some reading. As far as I can tell, most of these rituals have been lost over time, especially as indoor plumbing is now common. Ironically enough, that temple I bought the talisman at didn't have a flush toilet. It was really gross. Anyway, it wasn't that long ago that lavatories were a grungier, non-flushing, deep pit affair. I remember going to Hioba-chan's house, the great-grandma's, and she still had an old drop toilet, and that was in the 1990s. Fun fact, albeit entirely uncouth, a nickname for these old-style privies is bakudan toire. Toire is toilet, of course. Bakudan is the word for bomb. I'll just leave you with that for a moment. Believe it or not, restrooms back in the day were very dangerous places. I mean, they were dark, separated from the house, and they were literally very deep holes in the ground, or in older times, above a river. Both the ground and the river versions had two boards on which you placed your feet. And if that's not dangerous enough, don't get me started on the tales of ninja hiding down there, or the unholy things that Kappa were up to. Anyway, these outhouses were especially dangerous for children. Children are small and their balance isn't always great. It wasn't unheard of for them to fall in and drown. Because of this, there was a very interesting tradition called Setchin Mighty. This involves a small ceremony on the 7th day after the birth of your child, and it has you taking your little bundle of joy out of the house for the very first time. But where do you take them? Why, to the outhouse, of course. And why would you do that? I've read a bunch of different things, so I'm going to try to paraphrase and explain as best as I can. It seems there are a couple of reasons for this special trip. One is that the toilet is such a dangerous place, a place life can be lost. So, by tilting your wee one to look down into that maw of yuckiness and potential death, it acts as an inoculation of sorts. By presenting the child to the place that is the gateway between this world, life, and the other world, death, you actually tether the child to this world of the living. I read some traditions pretend to actually feed the child excrement too. Again, I said pretend. Depending on the area in Japan, visits were also made to the well. Sadako has done nothing if not teach us the perils of the well. The hearth, open fires are certainly a death trap for children, and the river, hazardous even in this modern world. Now, a second nicer reason to bring your child to the lavatory is to visit the god of the toilet. This deity who sits on its throne is not to be taken lightly. It is in fact a very important and powerful household god, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But first, let's look at what the god is called. You might hear it go by Kawayagami, Benjo-gami, or Toire no Kami-sama. The word kami or gami or kami-sama are all the same, God. You might remember toire as the Japanese pronunciation of toilet. And if you study Japanese, you might know that the word benjo is a crude word for toilet. But what the heck is Kawayagami? This one's interesting. Way back in the day, in villages that had streams, toilets were built over them. The kanji for kawaya is different, but you can't help thinking kawa, river, and ya, house or hut, make a lot of sense considering. Perhaps the characters have changed over the years. There is also the thought that it's not kawa but gawa, meaning next to, as the outhouse was next to the main house. Anyway, mention of a kawaya being a toilet can be found in the ancient text the Kojiki, back in 712. And while no one would call their bathroom that now, when referring to the restroom god, it's still fair game. Kawayagami. For those who didn't use rivers, it was learned that this valuable night soil could be collected and used to fertilize crops. And this segues beautifully into why the toilet god was so important and powerful. The, shall we call it compost, from the outhouse was used, of course, to fertilize the crops. Fertilizing crops led to food. Food fed the family, kept them not only healthy, but more importantly, alive. And this was definitely something to be thankful for. There was a professor at Sophia University, a Mr. Watanabe Shoichi, and I think he sums it up best in a paper he wrote in 1989. He said, "Our parents were raised by their parents. By eating rice and vegetables fertilized by their excrement, we live on the excrement of parents in our turn. We exist in the world as a result of our parents' bodily existence. We can say our own bodies exist as a result of the circulation of the excrement of our forefathers. Or, as we would say now, it's recycling." This quote, as well as some of the information here, is from a fascinating research paper published in International and Advanced Japanese Studies, Graduate School of Humanities and Social Sciences, University of Tsukuba, by a PhD student, Marta Elzbieta Sizgail. I'm so sorry for butchering your name, Marta, but I will link to her paper in the show notes on the website. The article is titled Sociology of Waste in Christian Europe and Japan, Comparative Analysis of the Notion of Human Waste. And it's the paper you did not know you wanted to read until you read it, and it is absolutely fascinating. I think I read it twice. So there was the belief that a powerful and important deity lived inside your privy, and therefore should be treated with respect. Sometimes offerings were made, paper talismans hung. Even small Kamidana, god shelves, were constructed. We just talked about a healthy family being the product of a happy Kawayagami, but also fertility and childbirth were associated with the deity as well. And there are some superstitions that show as much. For example, if you have a clean toilet, you will give birth to a good-looking child. Opposite, if your toilet is nasty, your kid will be ugly. Another, if a pregnant woman cleans the toilet, she will have an easy delivery. Or similar, if a pregnant woman offers sekihan, sticky rice cooked with azuki beans, to the toilet god, she will have an easy delivery. There was also the belief that the binjogami didn't like to be seen. So before you entered the outhouse, you would cough once to let it know you were there before opening the door, so it could hide. Where would it hide? I'll let you use your imagination for that one. The god, by some accounts, was also thought to be blind, and I wonder if that has something to do with where it was hiding. Seriously, these jokes write themselves. I read also that the god wasn't only blind, but it also had a red spear. Not sure what's up with that, but a courtesy cough before entering so the god can hide sounds like the polite thing to do. Oh, and there's one more. One place, and only one place, I read that the god didn't have any hands. Now, all that is folk belief and old wives' tales rooted in Japan. But there's more. The Buddhist idea of a toilet god is a little different. Yes, Japanese Buddhism also has something to say about the lavatory. Dogen, the very well-known Zen monk and writer, penned in detail what to do in the washroom in Chapter 1 of his Shobogenzo from the 13th century. He states that all temples must have an eastern quarter, or tosu. Tosu is the Buddhist term for toilet. I won't go into details about how he says you should use the facilities. You can figure that out yourself. Although it is interesting to note that he did specify which hand to use, which I thought was specific only to Hinduism. Something else that got my attention was his instruction on how you're supposed to press your hands together in prayer, gasho, to the guardian of the bathroom, Uzusama myo. Then snap your fingers 3 times before squatting. You caught that right. A new god name, Uzusama myo. Uzusama myo wasn't born out of Japanese history. He originated in India and is recognized in several sects of Buddhism: Tendai, Shingon, Zen, and Nichiren. In Tendai, he is one of the great 5 gods, or myo. In Nichiren, he is worshipped as both a toilet god and a fire god. In Indian mythology, the god is called Agni, the god of fire. Fire purifies. Toilets are considered places that are unclean and thus need to be purified. So there you go. Uzusama myo is one of the great guardian kings. Their names all ending in myo. Myo are super cool, fierce, dramatic, and scary looking. Compared to other myo, though, Uzusama has more varied appearances, sometimes having 6 arms, holding various implements, rings, beads, a sword, tools you'd probably not want to see and contemplate while sitting on the pot, but then again, the Kawayagami had that red spear, right? You can identify Uzusama myo because he stands with 1 foot raised high off the ground, almost as if he doesn't want to step in something. Ringed in fire, his hair often looks like fire and it's blowing upward. He's got a very angry expression on his face, and I'll put some images of him up on the website. Now remember how the Japanese version of the toilet god is related to fertility and childbirth? Well, here is where the Kawayagami and Uzusama myo sort of overlap. Evidently, during the Heian era, boy children were desired. So Uzusama myo, if he felt so moved, could change a girl fetus into a boy one. Now that's a lot. Like I said at the beginning, these traditions are mostly forgotten among youngsters these days. Except about 10 years ago, a singer named Uemura Kana released a song called Toire no Kamisama, the toilet god. It was about living with her grandmother and her grandmother telling her if she wanted to be beautiful, she should clean the toilet very well. There, the grandmother said, was a beautiful goddess living, and if she kept the toilet clean, then she would grow into a beautiful woman. So Uemura Kana cleaned the toilet every day. Nice one, Grandma. I'm kidding. There is another version of the Toire no Kamisama that says she is a beautiful woman, not some dude with a spear. So that's nice. Anyway, Uemura Kana's song was a huge hit here in 2010, which I think is delightful as it taught not only me, but a whole generation that there is this thing called a toilet god, and that we should pay them respect. Okay, that's all for today. If you've got a few minutes, though, go give that restroom of yours a scrubbing. And don't forget to cough before you go in. Thank you, everyone, so much for listening. Thank you, patrons, for being the absolute best. This month's bedtime story is actually not going to be a bedtime story. I found a treasure trove of animal folklore and myth and legend and superstitions. So this month I'm going to do the cat. I've never done this before, but it's really interesting, and I've never seen any of this in English before, so I'm sure it's going to be quite new and fun. I'll talk to you all again in 2 weeks. Thank you, and bye-bye. You've reached the end of the show, and I just want you to know how much we appreciate you listening and supporting us. Any subscribing, reviewing, and gushing to your friends, family, even random strangers really does help keep us going. If you have the means and you want to help a little more and get a little more, we are making extra content over on Patreon, all for only $5 a month. Or, if you like to read horror, you might be interested in my Bram Stoker-nominated short story collection, The Carp-Faced Boy and Other Tales. 本当にありがとうございます. Thank you again, and I'll talk to you real soon.